For 36 years, Arthur Sterling was the punchline of the Vance family jokes, a blue-collar nobody who dragged their golden girl down into a life of mediocrity. His father-in-law, a titan of Chicago real estate, never missed an opportunity to remind Arthur of his worthlessness. But Arthur has been keeping a secret that weighs $1.6 billion. He isn't just a retired carpenter. He is the silent architect of his father-in-law's entire empire. When a family dinner turns into a public execution of his dignity, Arthur decides it's finally time to sign the checks. I like to realize that our community covers all corners of the world. One quick question: from which corner of the planet are you watching me? Write your country below, and let's see how far we've come together. Leather chairs that cost more than my first house squeaked under the six of nervous executives, and the air in the boardroom tasted of stale coffee and impending doom. At the head of the mahogany table sat Charles Vance, my father-in-law, looking at me with the same expression one might reserve for a smudge of dirt on a pristine white carpet. I am getting ahead of myself, though. Let's rewind the tape. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am 64 years old, and I have been married to the lovely Eleanor Vance for 36 years. We live in a modest, drafty bungalow in Skokie, just outside of Chicago. It's 1,600 square feet of creaky floorboards and memories, a two-bedroom box where you can hear the wind howl off Lake Michigan in the winter and smell the neighbor's barbecue in the summer. Eleanor and I met in the winter of 1987 at a food drive for the homeless. She was volunteering, handing out hot soup with a warmth that seemed to melt the frost on the windows. I was 27, a carpenter's apprentice with sawdust in my hair and holes in my boots. She didn't care about the boots. She saw something in me that her blue-blooded family refused to acknowledge. We married 6 months later in a courthouse ceremony. Her parents didn't show up. Charles Vance made it crystal clear that his daughter was committing social suicide by marrying a laborer, and he washed his hands of the whole sordid affair. Eleanor chose me anyway. What Charles never knew, what even Eleanor didn't fully grasp until decades later, was that I wasn't just a guy good with a hammer. My great-uncle, a paranoid survivalist who lived off the grid in Nevada, had left me a few thousand acres of scrubland when he died in 1984. I thought it was worthless dirt, until a geological survey in 1987 found one of the largest lithium deposits in North America. By 1987, I was quietly worth $50 million. By 1987, thanks to the tech boom and battery demand, that number hit $250 million. Today, if you check the ledgers of my holding company, I am worth approximately $1.8 billion. I never breathed a word of it, not to the guys on the construction crews I worked with for 35 years, not to our neighbors, not even to our daughter Sarah, until she turned 30, and absolutely positively not to Charles Vance. See, Charles owned Vance Global, a commercial development firm that plastered its name on skylines from Chicago to St. Louis. He started it in 1970 with daddy's money and a ruthless streak a mile wide. By the time I married Eleanor, he was worth maybe $15 million, rich, respectable, and arrogant. What he didn't know was that starting in 1991, I began buying shares of Vance Global through a web of shell companies and blind trusts. 5% here, 12% there. Always anonymous. By 2006, I owned 49% of his company. I was the majority shareholder in everything but name. Every skyscraper Charles bragged about at the country club, every mall expansion he claimed was his genius idea, had been greenlit by my capital. When the housing market crashed in 2009 and Vance Global nearly went under, it was my private equity firm that silently injected the liquidity to save him. Charles Vance believed he was a self-made titan. He had no clue he had been playing with my chips for 20 years. Why the secrecy? Initially, it was just smart diversification. Vance Global was undervalued. But as the decades rolled on and Charles's disdain for me calcified into open hostility, it became something else. It was an insurance policy. A nuclear option I kept in my back pocket, never intending to use until last month. The catalyst was a phone call from Eleanor. Her voice had that brittle high pitch she gets when she's holding back tears. "Dad wants us to come for dinner," she said. "The whole family. He says it's mandatory." In 36 years, Charles had invited us to exactly 5 family functions: Eleanor's mother's wake, Sarah's law school graduation, and a few obligatory holidays where he spent the entire time checking his BlackBerry. "Did he say what for?" I asked, wiping grease off my hands in the garage. He mentioned the future of the company and Sarah. Our daughter Sarah was 36, a public defender in Cook County. She had inherited her mother's spine and my stubbornness. She lived in a third-floor walk-up, drove a beat-up Ford, and spent her days and fighting for people who had nothing. Charles considered her a failure. Not shark enough, not rich enough, not Vance enough. "When?" I asked. "Saturday. 7 o'clock. The Lake Forest estate. I had stepped foot in the Lake Forest mansion maybe 10 times in nearly 4 decades. It was a sprawling Gothic revival monstrosity that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. "We'll be there," I told Eleanor. "Don't worry." That Saturday, I put on my navy suit. It was from a department store rack, 12 years old, but clean and pressed. Eleanor wore a lovely gray dress. We drove our 2016 Honda Accord up the winding driveway, parking next to a brand new Porsche and a Bentley SUV. The Bentley belonged to Eleanor's brother, Preston, 43 years old, the senior VP of acquisitions, a man who had failed upward his entire life on the buoyancy of his last name. A butler ushered us into the formal dining room. The table was set for 6, though it could easily accommodate 20. Charles sat at the head, looking every bit the emperor in his twilight years. 60% silver hair, 100% ego. He didn't stand when we entered. "Eleanor," he nodded, not even looking at me. 36 years, and he still treated me like the help. Eleanor kissed his cheek. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the designated waste of space chair. "Where is Sarah?" Charles's new wife, a woman named Bitsy, who was younger than Eleanor, asked with a tight smile. "She's on her way," Eleanor said. "She had an arraignment run late." Preston checked his Rolex. "Public defenders, always chasing ambulances or criminals. No concept of punctuality." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. Preston hadn't closed a deal without his father's handwriting on the contract in his life. Lobster bisque was served. We ate in agonizing silence until Sarah burst in, looking harried but fierce, carrying a canvas messenger bag and wearing sensible shoes. "Sorry," she said, hugging Eleanor and squeezing my shoulder. She nodded coolly at Charles. Traffic on the Kennedy was a nightmare. "Now that we are all assembled," Charles said, tapping a crystal glass with a silver spoon, "I will be brief. I am 73. I built Vance Global from the dirt up, but I cannot run it forever." He paused, letting the drama build. Preston sat up straighter, looking like a golden retriever, spotting a tennis ball. "I am initiating the succession plan. Effective immediately, Preston will be named CEO. I will remain as chairman, but the day-to-day operations are his." Preston beamed, feigning humility badly. "I won't let you down, Dad. The legacy is safe." "I know," Charles said. He turned his cold gaze to Eleanor and Sarah. "This impacts you as well. I have updated the estate trust. When I pass, Preston will inherit the controlling interest. Eleanor, you will receive a non-voting stake of 4%. I felt Eleanor flinch next to me. 4%. A lifetime of being his daughter, reduced to a rounding error. "And Sarah," Charles continued, "you will receive a one-time cash disbursement of $100,000. I hope you use it to find a more lucrative career path." Sarah didn't blink. "I'm happy where I am, grandfather." "Stubborn," Charles sneered. "Just like your mother." He then turned his eyes directly to me. And Arthur, I assume your pension from the construction union isn't exactly a king's ransom. We get by, I said evenly. We have everything we need. Mediocrity is not a virtue, Arthur, Charles scoffed. However, for Eleanor's sake, I have arranged a position for you at Vance Global. We need a facilities supervisor for the downtown complex. It pays $40,000 a year. It's mostly managing the janitorial staff and checking boilers. It's hard work, but honest. At your age, you should be grateful for the charity. The room went dead silent. Even Preston looked at his soup, embarrassed. Eleanor's voice shook. Dad, Arthur doesn't need a job. He's retired. Let him speak, Ellie, I said softly, placing my hand over hers. Charles looked triumphant. He thought he had finally crushed me. Well, start date is the 1st of the month. You report to the building manager. Try not to be late. 36 years. 36 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing insults, of watching him treat my wife like a disappointment because she chose love over a portfolio. I had never wanted to flex my power. I valued my privacy. But as I watched him throw pennies at me and call it benevolence, I realized that some lessons have to be taught in a language bullies understand. That is a generous offer, Charles, I said, leaning back in the chair. But I'm afraid I have to decline. Charles's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I'm not interested in the job. Not interested? Charles let out a bark of incredulous laughter. Arthur, you are 64. You fixed porches for a living. You have no assets, no legacy. I am offering you a chance to finally contribute to this family instead of being a dead U6 on my daughter. Charles, that's enough, Bitsy murmured, looking nervous. No, he needs to hear it. Look at you, Arthur, driving that rust bucket, living in that shoebox in Skokie. You've dragged Eleanor down to your level. And now, when I offer you a hand up from the gutter, you have the audacity to have pride? Eleanor stood up, her face flushed. We're leaving. Come on, Art. Sit down, Eleanor, Charles barked. I'm not finished. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, I think you are. The room felt very small suddenly. Charles, I said, my voice calm but carrying a Wessex I usually kept hidden. There has been a misconception here, several, in fact, and I think it's time we cleared the air. What are you babbling about? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened an email I had received 10 minutes prior from my legal team. I'm talking about Vance Global, the empire you built brick by brick. What about it? It's not entirely accurate, is it? You didn't build it alone. You built it with massive capital injections from silent partners, specifically one majority shareholder. Charles waved a dismissive hand. We have institutional investors, banks, hedge funds. That's standard. True, but one entity owns more stock than all of them combined. 49% to be exact. Tell me, Charles, have you ever met the principal behind Apex Holdings? For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. That's a blind trust. It's strictly financial. It is, I agreed. But I can introduce you to the owner right now, Preston scoffed. Art, you're embarrassing yourself. Sit down. I turned the phone screen toward Charles. It was a formal notification from the Securities and Exchange Commission, filed that morning. This is a disclosure of beneficial ownership, I said. As of 8:00 a.m. today, Apex Holdings has revealed its primary beneficiary. Apex Holdings owns 49% of Vance Global, Charles. And I am Apex Holdings. The silence was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush the furniture. That's not possible, Charles whispered, his face draining of color. It is. I've been your majority shareholder since 2005. I started buying in 1993. Every time you needed a bailout, that was me. The Riverwalk Tower in 2012, my money. The O'Hare Logistics Center last year, my approval. I've been signing your checks for 20 years. Preston grabbed his father's arm. Dad, he's lying. He's a carpenter. He doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Is that so? I tapped the screen and opened my banking app, scrolling to the summary of my diversified portfolio. Net worth, $1.82 billion. This is my primary portfolio, Preston. Mining rights, lithium technology, green energy. Vance Global is a hobby. It represents about 3% of my total assets. Eleanor was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. Art, why? Why didn't you tell me? Because it didn't matter, Ellie, I said, looking at her. We were happy. We had the house, we had Sarah, we had a life. Money changes people. I didn't want it to change us. But more importantly, I looked at Charles. I wanted to know if your father would ever respect me, not for my wallet. I got my answer tonight. Charles looked like he was having a stroke. This is a hostile takeover. It doesn't have to be, I said, buttoning my cheap suit jacket. But since I own the place, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I have some concerns about the proposed leadership changes, specifically handing the CEO role to a man whose only qualification is his DNA. Preston turned purple. You can't do that. I can, I said coolly, and I will unless what? Charles rasped. Unless you resign. Gracefully. Tomorrow. You take a role as chairman emeritus, strictly advisory, no voting power. Preston, you step down as VP and take a position where you can actually learn the business, maybe regional sales. We bring in an outside CEO, someone competent. And if I refuse, Charles spat, then I vote my shares. I fire you both for cause, mismanagement and nepotism, and you leave with nothing but your golden parachutes and a lot of public embarrassment. Why now? Charles asked, his voice shaking. After all these years, why humiliate me now? Because you humiliated my wife, I said, my voice hard. You showed Eleanor exactly what she is worth to you. 4%? That's an insult. And you tried to treat me like a servant in front of my daughter. I can take your insults, Charles. I've taken them for 40 years, but you do not disrespect my family. I turned to the door. Come on, Eleanor. Sarah, let's go get some real food. I'm craving a burger. We walked out, leaving the three of them sitting in the ruins of their ego. In the car, driving back down the highway toward the city lights, the silence stretched out for a mile before Eleanor finally broke it. "0.6 billion?" she asked softly. Give or take, I said, gripping the steering wheel. Our house in Skokie is worth maybe 450. It's worth more than that to me, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Then she started laughing, a full belly laugh that filled the car. Did you see his face? Art, did you see his face? I saw it, I smiled. You really didn't care about the money, did you? It's just numbers on a screen, Elle. It kept us safe. It let me donate to the clinic where you volunteer. It let me pay off Sarah's law school loans anonymously. That's all it was good for. Sarah leaned forward from the back seat. So, what happens tomorrow? Tomorrow, we see if your grandfather has any dignity left. My guess is he retires. Preston will scream, but he likes his allowance too much to fight me. We'll hire a real CEO. The company will actually grow. And us? Sarah asked. We go home. Tomorrow is Sunday. I'll make pancakes. Your mom will do the crossword. Just like always. Just like always, Eleanor repeated, resting her hand on my knee. With $1.6 billion. But I was wrong about one thing. The money did change something. The next morning my phone rang at 9 a.m. It was Charles. I'll step down, he said. His voice sounded old, hollowed out. I'll make the announcement, but I have to ask, why? You could have destroyed me a decade ago. It wasn't about revenge, Charles, I said, standing in my kitchen, flipping a pancake. It was about protecting the people I love. As long as you were just a jerk to me, I could take it. But last night, you tried to make Eleanor feel small. That's when you crossed the line. I never meant to hurt her, I know, but you did, and that's something you have to live with. He paused for a long time. For what it's worth, I underestimated you. I was wrong. Yes, I said. You were. I hung up. The board meeting went exactly as I predicted. Charles retired to spend time with family. Preston was moved to a regional office in St. Louis. A sharp woman from New York was brought in to run the company. Vance Global thrived. Better than ever, actually, without the dead W6 at the top. Eleanor and I still live in our bungalow in Skokie, We still drive the Honda, but now Eleanor runs a massive charitable foundation for homeless families in Chicago. Sarah opened a nonprofit legal clinic in the South Side, fully funded, offering top-tier defense to those who can't afford it. Charles and I have an understanding now. We aren't friends. We never will be. But he treats Eleanor with respect. He asks Sarah about her cases. That's all I ever wanted. People ask why I live like a pauper when I have the GDP of a small country in the bank. They don't understand that the simple life was the goal, not the consolation prize. The money was a tool, a shield. But the real wealth was the Sunday mornings, the walks by the lake, the quiet evenings on the porch with Eleanor. Charles Vance spent his life building monuments to his own name. He had everything money could buy, but he missed the things that actually matter. I learned that lesson a long time ago from a girl serving soup in a drafty community center. Some men measure their worth in skyscrapers. I measure mine in the peace of knowing I can protect the people I love. And I've always known which ledger I'd rather be in the black on. What did you think of this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content coming your way.